Toyota usually designs their cars well, and they are usually simple cars, they are reliable, but after all, it is a machine. And eventually, certain things will go south, and that's okay. You get them fixed, and life's good. But in the case of this 2007 Sequoia, they tend to have a notorious thing that is anything but simple and well engineered. The exhaust manifolds love to leak on this. Let us talk about that and more right after this. So this is the 2UZ FE, one of the best engines Toyota made, and from the old and the new, this still is one of the best engines. But this engine has one common problem. That is the exhaust manifolds. So here's what happens with the exhaust manifolds. You start this car cold, all of a sudden it has like a ticking sound and you smell the exhaust inside the car, then it goes away when it warms up. Then that progresses into, you have the ticking sound all the time, and it's like, especially when you accelerate, it gets so loud that, and you smell the fumes, and it gets a big, big problem. Normally, exhaust manifolds on V8s are more cumbersome to replace. But the problem is, the reason they do that is the design. I don't know what gotten into Toyota when they designed this. It's just not a good design. And I'll show you that. But the bigger problem is, in the trucks, it is a nightmare to replace these. And if you add rust on top of that, things get really bad. We've just finished replacing the driver's side, which is the worst side, on this Sequoia. Let's lift it up. Let us look at it, and I'll show you why this is not exactly a DIY job, and why is it expensive, and then why is this designed this way where it leaks all the time. So here's the exhaust manifold in the car. You can barely see it because it's covered, but basically this is the cover that the exhaust manifold is underneath it. You can see the shiny new part and the rusty exhaust. First problem is the steering shaft is in your way. Then this brake line. Then the engine mount is actually in your way in the Sequoia only, on the others it's not. I mean, this tower right here is also in your way. So you're basically spending the whole day trying to find a way to get 8 nuts. That's it. You're only removing 8 nuts and this thing basically comes out. But you spend the entire day trying to engineer a way to get to them without disassembling the whole car. Now the repair manual, of course, says remove the exhaust and just take the 8 bolts and life is good. Well, they don't tell you that this is in your way, steering shaft is in your way, this is in your way, and the problem is you can't just start taking all this stuff out. You notice this has this particular sticker right here. You can barely see it, and I'll tell you from experience what this sticker used to say. Caution, heavy part. Every time you see a Toyota truck with a frame, body and frame, with this sticker here, this is a replacement frame under recall, campaign, whichever the case may be. So this frame has been replaced on this truck. So if the frame was rusty enough where this actually qualified, it basically had a hole in it and it got replaced. Well, the exhaust manifolds didn't, and the rest of the car didn't. So can you imagine how rusty that is? Basically, most of these nuts for the exhaust manifold, they rounded off, and it's such a bad spot. And it gets worse if you get into like a Line Cruiser. It is worse. It's a lot worse. And if you get into a 4Runner, now you have even less space, and things are worse. GX, same thing. Tundra is pretty much the same as this. But here's where things go to the next level with this particular car. Let me raise it up some more and show you where the fun really started. So, to start this job, I want to say wrap around and let's show them this side. To start this job, you're basically going to take the exhaust, and once you finally get the exhaust manifold loose, you're going to pull it out of here and then put the new one in, and then the exhaust goes back in. But here's the problem. Let's remove this exhaust. So we got 3 nuts here. That's beautiful. Let's follow this exhaust back. Okay, there's no removal point. Aha. Well, this is, somebody decided to cut the flange that normally goes here, that looks like this. So you can, although this one is completely gone, but still I could somewhat separate that and put new bolts and whatnot. They welded it here, and then welded it here. So how am I going to remove the exhaust? This is where things go to the next level. Because now finally, after we got the exhaust manifold loose, well, how do you get it out? There's absolutely no space to get it out of the side. There is no chance that I will be able to loosen this entire exhaust, push it all the way back. It's just not going to happen. And this adds more time and more complication. And then here's what we ended up having to do. So if you look around here, the only way we were able to remove that exhaust manifold was to loosen the compressor, which means the belt is off, get the compressor out of the way, remove the oil filter, which we did not need to do an oil change. Now we are, because we have to remove the oil filter, and get the exhaust manifold out of the front here. That's not the way the book says it. And this is the problem with this job. You look at labor time. Sometimes I look labor times on these. It says 1.2 hour and 15 minutes to do this. I'm sorry. Let's just reiterate that for a second. It will potentially take a mechanic that hasn't done this an hour and a half just to figure out, what are we doing here? This is such a horrendous design. And then on top of that, we have the welded exhaust. Please, if you work in an exhaust shop, you do exhaust work, please don't do this. Put a flange. I know this is a lazy, easy way, quick in and out, but don't do this. Weld two flanges, because care about your brothers who are mechanics who will one day need to do something to this car and not have to deal with this situation. That's the first problem. Now, let's move on to the reason this whole thing came about, the exhaust manifold. Here's the old part. 90% of exhaust manifolds, there'll be just one piece, you bolt it on, and we're good. For reasons unknown, Toyota decided we need a two-piece. You see how this works? So basically, this goes on the cylinder head, and then this little thing that the studs go through it pushes on this and holds it up. Well, here's what happens with time. Now you have kind of this thin little piece of metal that is welded in the inside. Here's what ends up happening to it. And let me see if I can get you can see the cracks. Do you see this, right? Look in this area. Do you see my light shining through? Well, that's completely rotten through. Let's look at the next one. This one is not cracked. I don't see the light through. How about this one? I think a few of them were. Oh, this one is. See it right there. See my light through? That's it. That's why this exhaust manifold leaked. Now, if this was all one piece, we wouldn't have this. This would actually be fine. And then for the last one, which is just the best one. Do you see these 4 holes right here? These are the secondary air injection. So you notice here, this is where the inlet is, so air would come in and go through here. That's how the secondary air injection worked. Look at these studs. Of course they broke. And the worst part is, you actually want them to break, because if they don't break, you're in trouble. Because here's where that actually is in the car. Here. Now it looks initially open, but the problem is this pipe is a solid pipe. If the studs stay there and you're fighting the manifold, you can't actually get the manifold to loosen off of this pipe. You end up having to need to bend it a little bit just to get it out of the way, and now the studs won't line up anymore. And that's what we've been fighting for a while to get it in. We finally got it. We're super happy. We got everything together. We got a few odds and ends here and there, but this is not a good design. And folks, if you have this noise with these exhaust manifolds, be prepared for a large bill. And understand that the large bill is not because I need to pay my mortgage, or your mechanic needs to pay their mortgage, or we just like to overcharge for easy work. This is not easy work. This exhaust manifold took us an entire day to get it out. And it was a lot of improvising and trying not to disassemble the entire car. Some mechanics have gotten so desperate that they found it easier to pull the body off the frame Yes, you heard that right. To do both than to do them in the car. And even then, it's still very difficult, but at least you have a little bit more room, a little bit more access from the top. And if one of these bolts or the studs that go in the cylinder head break, which is very possible, now we're talking about not only getting the exhaust manifold out, now we're drilling into the cylinder head, which is aluminum. And at that point, you kind of have to try the best that we can do. It's a very tight space. A little bit better once you get the manifold out to drill it, but still, this job on its own can get complicated. If you have one of these cars, or all the cars with the 2UZ, listen for that noise. Especially if you're buying one, and kind of think about that, because this exhaust manifold job, very expensive. And what adds more expense to it is if you have a rusty car. You know, if you live in my area, like Chicago area, every car is a rusty car, especially when they get older. That's just the norm. But in this particular job, things will get extremely complicated. Folks, while we have the Sequoia, the only generation of this Sequoia that we've talked about was one that was so bad, it was very rusty. So many of you have commented this is one of the greatest cars Toyota made, and it is. This one is actually having brand new frame. So let's put it up. Let's do the rest of the inspection underneath it. Right off, I see beautiful sight, although this one is backwards. That's okay. This is an OEM caliper with OEM pads. Don't you love it when Toyota used to put these strange colors on their pads? Now most of them are black, but they used to put green or this pinkish color. Very interesting how they did this. Now the brakes are good. They're brand new. They're actually both sides are new. Shock looks original. I don't think this has ever been replaced. I don't see any issues with it. This bushing, these love to go on these. Seem okay. And lately I've been seeing control arm bushings. Oh, these control arms have been replaced with the frame. There's no way. They look brand new. I think these were replaced with the frame. Let's look at front sway bar links. These are notorious to go. This one is good. Other one looks good. Now the rack and pinion. This movement? No. So here's what happens with the rack and pinion. I'm not too worried about this. This is a very small, actually this is coming from the engine. Oh, might have a small rear main leak. We'll investigate that a little bit further. It's very small, it's just a little seepage. But what happens with this rack, and something you want to watch for, do you see this bushing, how it's cracking up? Eventually this bushing will go, and then the rack will just start rattling around here, and you see how rusty this thing is? It'll just pop right here and start leaking. So if you see this bushing like this, and it's something we're going to recommend to this customer, get a new bushing. If you ever have a Sequoia that wanders all over the road, I almost can guarantee you it is this bushing. They're that common. Super DIY, just 2 bolts, comes out, you replace it. Very DIY, very simple job to replace it. But if you leave it, unfortunately, it's going to damage the rack, and we have all kinds of leaks. Transmission, pretty dry. I don't see any leaks, any issues. Everything looks pretty good on the trans. We got to check the service history, see if it's been serviced. And then transfer case, everything looks good. I don't see any leaks, any issues. Frame is just beautiful. And I remember from the days of replacing the frames. If you look right here, all the brake lines get replaced with the frames because there's no way you're going to separate any of this stuff. So look at these brake lines. They all look nice and shiny because they've been replaced. As we move past the Borla, is that a Borla muffler? Yes, it is. I don't know why we need a Borla muffler on a car like this, but we have it. And just for you to kind of, looking at this frame looks brand new. Just for you to gauge how the previous frame condition was, just look at this. Look at the body. It is completely almost gone. Good thing it's the body and frame, because this would have been a huge issue if this is a unibody. But this is how this frame used to look like at some point. That's why it was changed. But as we move around the back, I don't think this shock is original. I think it's been replaced at some point. Hard to tell if it's OEM shock or not. How about this one? Just from this marking, I think these are original shocks. This does have air suspension in the back, which we don't seem to have any issues with them. Usually these are pretty reliable until they go. And usually if you don't catch them in time, the car will keep dropping and dropping. It wipes out the pump, and that's how things get expensive. Rear brakes, a little rusty, probably 50% or so. just under 50%, but I think we're good. Everything else looks good. You notice, speaking of the pump, how rusty that thing is. This is the pump for the air suspension. Extremely rusty, but this car was not sagging. It actually sat outside for a little bit while we got to it, and it didn't sag down. Didn't seem to have any issues, but everything else looks pretty good. This is the one thing I never understand. When they do the frames, they actually swap this over. Such a bad idea, because this is the tow hitch, and it's yeah. What are you gonna do? That's how it is, folks. When it comes to the exhaust manifold job on this car, be patient with your mechanic, because this is a big job. These are really good trucks, but this is one of their problems. Or if you have any car with the 2UZ, you do want to check this stuff if you're buying one. Some of them get really bad, where like if it's just a little bit when you start it in the morning, it goes away when it warms up, because basically that crack as I showed you is very small, and eventually when it expands, it closes it up and it no longer has a leak. But when you have one like this where it's wide open, it's going to make a lot of noise, and you're going to have the smell, and it's very expensive to replace. And if things can go south, if one of these studs snap, you just added a lot more labor to this job, and that's the problem with this. And usually, and this is a conversation with the owner of this car, usually when one of them is like this, the other one is not far behind. So ideally, you'd want to replace them as a pair, but in this case, the owner is trying to kind of pace himself. We think the driver's side is leaking the most, so we're going to start with that one, see how it sounds, and then proceed to the passenger side. Hope not, but we might have to actually tackle it. But the driver's side is always harder because you have the steering shaft. Passenger side, it is not as busy here. You notice you have a little bit more open space, and here you can actually see, do you see these bottom bolts? They're obstructed by the engine mount, so you have to lift the engine, take off this bracket for the mount, and then get to the bottom two bolts, which is not fun if things start breaking and now you're drilling and you're spending all this time just to get a couple nuts out. That's the problem with this. You notice how much room we have here and how little room we have here. And the reason for that is you got the steering shaft in your way and the rack coming up and the front prop shaft and all that. So the driver's side will always be the more difficult one, and the one, if you're doing both, start with the driver's side. Always when you work on cars, you have multiple tasks on the job, start with the hard one, because this is when you have your full energy, full attention, and kind of breeze to the finish with the easier side. It's not exactly the easy side, but it's easier. Folks, I hope this video was helpful, informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day. Started.